What up, everyone? I'm Hilo from New Leaf Studios, and this is Watch Me Whip, Part 1, The Sketch. So, yeah, I had an initial sketch that I drew that I thought was actually pretty cool, but, for some reason it just felt really stiff, and the face just didn't feel like just how I wanted it. I could have just modified the sketch, but in my mind, like, when I was approaching, like, making a new sketch, I was like, let me try, like, a different tactic overall, and so I just decided to do a new take on it, to have more of a um, a more lighter approach, like a kind of more movement, kind of isolate that like gazelle kind of body type with the back legs being like more like cat legs, or more yeah, more feline legs. I was like, you know what, like let's have it do like a nice little hop or something like that, and then just have the like kind of in a defensive pose, um, like the whole concept of this drawing that I was focusing on was that like maybe this creature is kind of misunderstood. So as opposed to being very like standoffish, maybe he's like he's kind of in between. He's a little pissed off, but he's also in motion, maybe trying to like get away, or like just feels threatened. So it's more of a typical animalistic kind of response where they react violently when they feel threatened, more or less. So yeah, it was actually really interesting, the face, to draw the face. I just couldn't get it right. I used a picture reference, and I was like, oh, okay, sweet. It kind of just cleared everything up really quickly. And then moving into the line stage. So for me, this was the biggest challenge was to not go into too much detail. You kind of see me diving into a little detail, like the hair, and then I kind of back off from it. And the reason is because I want to keep this manageable. Like I want to keep it to the point where it's not extremely detailed, so like every single strand of hair, in that mane is drawn in, because these are exercises, and not only the aspect of drawing this in our style, in my style, but also these are supposed to be manageable illustrations. I can do them all in one sitting. So it really it's important to remember when you're illustrating, just to keep the purpose of the things that you're doing in mind while you're creating, and you don't get too caught up in the details aspect of it, because then it can kind of take away from the overall goal. So it's just really important to remember that stuff. But yeah, in terms of the lines, this was a fairly easy one, just because like I did a lot of work sketching, so I really just had to go in and fill in the blanks here, like that wasn't part of the original sketch, and then just highlight some areas, make sure that the lines that I did make in the sketch come through in a really good way. So yeah, it was definitely a fun thing though. This drawing was super interesting, and I think it just turned out really really well. Again, after reconsidering the original sketch, and then the color aspect, this was probably the most challenging aspect. I changed a little bit of the drawing at the front end there. You can see I kind of changed the horns a little bit. Um, so this was the most challenging part, not the blocking in, but the coloring aspect of it, because it goes from one spectrum of color to the other. So it goes from it's like complementary colors. So it goes from like green to red. So like that whole Christmas vibe, right? But you have green at one side, or green aqua color on one side, and then the red tint on the other side, with the mane and the face at like warm colors. So yeah, it was just an interesting kind of challenge to have, and I'd never really taken on that kind of challenge. There's a lot of mixer brush that's involved here, and you'll see, just to get all the colors to flow. Because there was a nice gradient, I left out a little bit of a detail that when I looked at the picture reference for the color, I was like, let me change that, and then I changed the horns again. So yeah, it was really interesting in terms of just mocking the original work, and trying to assimilate that gradient that Nicholas Cole kind of like embedded in there. So that was probably the most challenging part of the color. The color is the longest aspect of it. Was probably about almost 2 hours, as opposed to the other aspects, which were about half an hour to 40 minutes each. So this was definitely the most complicated part of the whole process. And as you can see, as we watch the video, it's definitely the majority of it is just trying to color this bad boy. So yeah, I didn't really have a way that I wanted to handle some of the differences between the characters. So like this character that I drew is much different from the character that Nicholas referenced. It's definitely not as cute. And Nicholas's character has just small differences. So to address those differences was just a challenge, because I'm like, oh, how am I going to do this? What color should I make this? All that kind of stuff. So there was a lot of thinking involved. A lot of cognitive processes involved with like just how to take on these specific aspects. And then again, when we see the mixer brush come in, you'll see that it was a lot of work with the gradients and things like that. So this was definitely a challenge, in the funnest sense of the word, because I definitely enjoyed it. So we start getting the mixer brush here, and just making sure that everything looked really solid in the way that I wanted it to look. So when you approach an illustration, sometimes there's just different goals, like you have a goal to maybe have it look really well done in the line work aspect. Are you like in the case of this drawing, I wanted the colors to really pop and to match pretty straightforwardly how Nicholas originally made them. So the challenge there was finding the right brushes for the mixer brush, to find the right aspects of the brush. So you're changing the opacity, the flow, all that kind of stuff, the mixing, the attributes of the brush itself to make the kind of effects that I wanted. So that was part of the challenge there. And then the color in itself, like I said, just to match up all the colors, to have that nice gradient from one color to the next, to make sure that this portion of it is isolated. We have a neutral in the middle, and then we kind of have the other portion that's very contrast, that has a high contrast to the other side. So it was just a really interesting one. I don't think that I've had as much of a challenge, like particularly with color, with any of these other exercises up until this point. So this was definitely like flexing the muscles a bit, and tapping into a lot of the tactics that I've learned in the past, but I don't use all the time. So again, that's why the color aspect was probably the toughest part of this entire thing. So I go through numerous brushes, I go through numerous techniques, I try different eraser tactics, I try so again, just drawing from a lot of the things that I know how to do, but it's not necessarily things I do all the time. So you kind of have to it's like muscle memory, you kind of have to do it or you lose it, use it or you lose it. So when you don't do something in a while, it kind of is a challenge to get back into the swing of it. So here I'm just going with the effects of the venom, and then I'm like, hey, I want to I have these contrasting, one side to the other side, so I'm going to go ahead and just really solidify that with another effect that's kind of like a roar. So I think it looks cool, but I don't know if it accomplishes that vibe of having a roar. But yeah, some things work better than others, but it's okay. It's like I said, this exercise is more or less not perfectionism. It's more towards the aspect of just making something that I like, that looks cool, and not focusing or over focusing on in particular details. All right, so jumping in, as you can see, that was a long part. Jumping into the final stages actually moved pretty quickly in terms of this background that I'm going to create. It just kind of came together really easily, and I didn't. Again, you have to zoom out and then think about what you want to accomplish with this work. My focus was not making a really intense background. my focus here was just creating a background that resembled something that was more natural, a little more like painterly in a sense, and it didn't draw attention away from the foreground. So my foreground is the main point that I'm focusing on here. So the background is not necessarily going to be that dramatic, dynamic, or attention like grabbing. So I'm moving into the foreground again. Like I said, the background's already done. I just played with a couple layer filters, and then after the overall painting, and that's it. And now I moved into the shadow aspect of it. I do like doing the backgrounds a lot first before I do the shadow, just because like it does give me some insight as to like how I should put the lights and the shadows and where I should place them and stuff. So sometimes I mix up this process. Sometimes I do the shadows first, but I do think it works a bit better when I do the shadows after I do the background, because again, it just makes everything fit together a lot I guess more methodically. Like it just makes everything cohesive at the end. So yeah, the snake aspect was a fair challenge, just because snakes are kind of like tough to draw if you don't do them all the time, again, if you don't have that muscle memory. But now I'm just inserting the light on both sides like I typically do, and we're all wrapped up. So that's the final piece. I think it turned out really, really cool, especially with that lighting effect on the top, the blue. This has been Watch Me Whip, and definitely check out Nicholas Cole on Instagram. He's a fantastic artist. It was a pleasure. And then check out our link tree for all of our awesome other stuff that we're doing.